that map is my touchstone. By the way, my grandson created this map. It's to show all of the cities that I worked in 1995. He found a font that's both Cyrillic and Roman, and it's been a pretty cool use for me as I've talked all over the world, literally. We shouldn't have been surprised. Russian President Putin's assault on Ukraine shocked us with its brutality. We were stunned at the depth of Putin's naked aggression. We were jolted by the realization that something so horrible was happening in real time. Shocked, stunned, jolted, yes, but not surprised. He's been preparing us for years. Putin was plucked from the shadows of the KGB to be president of Russia in the year 2000, when the Union wasn't yet cold in its grave. Boris Yeltsin had presided over Russia's first post-Soviet years as an open society and a build-it-yourself democracy. But his hand-picked successor had other plans for the planet's largest country. Early on, Putin described the fall of the Soviet Union as the 20th century's greatest geopolitical catastrophe. No small assessment for a century that included 2 world wars. He whipped up a frenzy of hate around Mikhail Gorbachev for frittering away the political and military power of the USSR, and he boasted that he alone could restore Russia to the heights of power that he believed the Soviet Union had wielded. Over the past 2 decades, Putin has managed to whittle away at everything open and democratic that he inherited and to sculpt a repressive authoritarian Russia in the image of the USSR. The resurrection would be nearly complete, except for the absence of the 14 other Soviet republics that became independent states when the USSR dissolved in 1991. Sovereign states, I might add, most of which don't share Putin's global vision of a Russia restored to glory. So why are those missing republics such a headache? I'm gonna come over here and just do some pointing. Do you think I dare touch this, Devorah? Can I point by point? I think not. Okay. Just glance down the western border of what is now Russia. This is European Russia right here. Here's Moscow. Here's St. Petersburg. That's Lake Ladoga. Here's Finland, and here are the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and right here is Lithuania. And this is Belarus, the last remaining autocratic state in Europe, right there. Here is Ukraine. We know very much about what's going on there. By the way, Ukraine is the largest country in Europe. Most people are kind of boggled by that fact, but it is. And here, although it's not defined, is Georgia and Armenia, and we're wrapping ourselves around the Black Sea. The reason that those are not separated out on this map is I didn't go there in 1995. I went there at other times, but not in 1995. So this ring, starting up here with the 3 Baltics, Belarus, Ukraine, and the 5 other Black Sea countries are the issue here. Now, remember, there's also all along here the stands, the largely Muslim republics that at the moment aren't an issue for Putin. However, we all know what's below the stands is China, and that may well become part of the geopolitical equation as we go forward. But right now, I just want you to think about these republics on the western edge of Russia. All those countries that climb from the Caucasus in the south, right back here. Caucasus are right here. By the way, where is the highest mountain in Europe? Everybody wants to say the Alps. It's Mount Elbrus right here. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Mount Elbrus, 14,500 feet, the tallest mountain in Europe. All of these countries that climb from the Caucasus to the south, to the Baltic Sea in the north, Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, served as a buffer between the USSR and the West with a capital W. And it was from the West that came the greatest political and military threats to Russia historically. In 1812, it was Napoleon Bonaparte whose troops actually occupied the city of Moscow and nearly burned it to the ground. In 1942, it's the Nazis who stormed onto Russian soil, only to be stopped at Stalingrad, the site of the bloodiest battle of the Great Patriotic War, which is what the Russians call World War II. Very quickly, Stalingrad is what is now called Volgograd, and it's right there on the Volga River. Putin recalled this moment of Soviet greatness in his speech announcing the invasion, describing the leaders of Ukraine as neo-Nazis. By labeling the democratically elected leaders of Ukraine as Nazis, despite the fact that Zelensky is Jewish, he is pushing the patriotism button for most ordinary Russians who vividly recall the loss of 22 million people, an entire generation of young men in the Great Patriotic War. On May 9th, every year, Russia reenacts the patriotic celebration of victory in Europe with its own Victory Day observances. I was living there in 1995 when the 50th anniversary of VE Day was cause for a week of fireworks, the opening of a dazzling new Victory Park, and a visit by President Clinton. Some of us have noted that the timing of the invasion in late February was no doubt planned with an eye on May 9th, Victory Day, when Putin would celebrate Russia's lightning-quick victory against all those Nazis in Ukraine. Putin's current military reset with diminished objectives on the Donbass and the Black Sea coast of Ukraine just might be timed, we thought, to have something to crow about on Victory Day. Turns out he didn't even barely mention that they were at war on Victory Day. He did not declare victory, whatever you wanted to call victory, and leave, which everybody was really hoping might happen. He also did not announce an entire mobilization of the country, which no doubt would have lost him his control over most of the people of Russia. In fact, nothing happened on May 9th. But back to our geography lesson about those buffer states on Russia's eastern border. At the end of World War II, the Iron Curtain cleaved Europe in two and extended the buffer against the West to include the entire Soviet bloc, from Berlin to Russia itself. Then in 1989, Gorbachev let it all get away when he allowed the Berlin Wall to fall without sending Soviet troops into the breach. In 2 short years, the USSR was gone as well. And what of those buffer republics that got away? The Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, were the last to be forcibly sucked into the Soviet Union, a gift from the Axis powers in exchange for favors rendered. Once they were free and independent again, all 3 countries scrubbed themselves clean of the Russification they had had to endure and rushed into the open arms of NATO, the West's military alliance. I witnessed this all firsthand In 1988, I spent a week in Tallinn, the capital of the Estonian Soviet Republic. Back to the map. Right there, right on the Baltic. In the capital of the Estonian Republic, in a small hotel on a wide boulevard downtown. Every morning I would pull back my drapes to see the blue, white, and black Estonian flags, the flags of independent Estonia, before it was swallowed into the USSR. They were hanging from every window in the apartments across the street.
I'm out.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm getting ready to go get my hair cut.
Buildings on my side
Okay.
as well. Within an hour, a cherry picker on a flatbed truck would be dragged along both sides of the streets to pull all those flags down. The next morning, they would be back. And the charade repeated itself every day of my visit. I would later learn that a thriving underground market recycled all those flags day in and day out. It was a well-choreographed dance and a visual expression of staunch Estonian resistance. In 1995, after the fall of the Soviet Union, I stood in line to check into a hotel in Riga, Latvia, just below Estonia, waiting for a desk clerk to attend to a Russian couple ahead of me. The clerk told the couple they would have to speak Latvian now that they were in Latvia. They replied, the couple replied in Russian that they didn't speak Latvian. They traded heated comments back and forth, theirs in Russian, hers in Latvian, until the couple picked up their bags and left in a huff. I stepped up to the desk, put down my beautiful blue US passport, and asked in English or Russian. She replied, Russian, my English isn't so good. 4 years after independence, and in Latvia, the resistance continued. The Republic of Georgia walked a careful path between East and West until it got itself into a bloody encounter with Russia in 2008. Ukraine tap danced between leaders who did Putin's bidding and those who maintained a strategic distance, but it still suffered the indignity of Russia seizing Crimea 8 years ago. The one outlier has been Belarus, with its thug Alexander Lukashenko wielding a heavy hand in Europe's last autocracy. Lukashenko is snug in bed with Putin, opening Belarus to Russian tanks and ragtag troops as they regrouped, slinking across Ukraine's northern border with their tails between their legs. It seems pretty clear that Putin saw subjugating and swallowing Ukraine, the largest country in Europe, as his path to restoring Soviet glory and reestablishing his buffer to the West. Snatching the Crimea was just to test the waters, to see how much NATO and the US cared. Apparently not enough. Now he's working on reestablishing a land bridge to Crimea across the southern Ukraine. The city of Mariupol had to be starved and crushed because it stood in the way. Right here. This is the Donbass, right here. And Mariupol is right there, and here's the Crimea. And so a land bridge was the goal. This time, NATO and the US have forged a remarkably tight coalition to punish Putin for his acts and crimes of war. In fact, it's incredibly significant that just yesterday, the European Union vowed to eliminate purchases of oil from Russia by the end of the year. That will mean a reduction of more than $1 billion of income a day to Putin's war chest. But this will offer little solace to the people of Ukraine, most of whom have family members in Russia, who will suffer to satisfy Putin's lust for glory and grandeur. People can keep asking me, do you think the Russian people know what's going on? Do they know that Putin has sent their sons to bomb Ukraine to cinders, to execute civilians who might be their own relatives, and to batter their 1,000-year-old civilization to bits? By the way, just for a little history update, it was in Kiev, which is now the capital of Ukraine, where the Russian nation was born in 1088. It's the year that Prince Cyril gathered all of the chieftains in the region and actually formed a nation. And it was the baptism of Cyril in 1088 that led to the establishment of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now there's a cleft between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but 1088 was a significant year, and I was there for the 1,000th anniversary of this event.
I thought you were going to stop with, I was there, period. You really look good.
A lot gooder than I thought. Do they know that Putin's justification for his special military action is a lie born of his pathological need to crush a burgeoning democracy too close to Russia's borders, to reestablish what he perceives as the power and glory of the former Soviet Union? Do they know that the democracies of the world have found a unique solidarity in their efforts to stop this war of aggression? Of course they know. The young and educated know, and they have expressed their distaste by leaving the country. 3.6 million people between the ages of 15 and 35 have left Russia since February 24th. That's a lot of people, and that is a huge brain drain. Putin actually has made it easy for them to leave. They're the troublemakers who marched in the streets in support of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, now in prison for the foreseeable future, so good riddance to them. However, it appears in the last month or so, somebody has called to his attention the fact that these people leaving are the future of Russia, and he has now clamped down, and it's much more difficult to leave than it was before. Early this month, Politico published a letter from Finland written by a woman in Helsinki who interviewed some of the passengers on the last high-speed train from St. Petersburg. Here's some excerpts from her report. Maria, a 32-year-old tech professional from St. Petersburg, said, "I'm running away from Russia because of Putin, along with many people who are young and in the IT field. Everybody wants to leave. On the metro, on the streets, in the airport, police are stopping people and reading their phone messages, looking at their texts. Some people think I'm not a patriot, that I hate my country, but I love my country so much. I don't like the government. When I criticize my country, I'm like a good mother who loves her children, but helps them understand how to work on negative things and become better. Yesterday, my mother showed me her cemetery documents so I could find her if I ever go back." Another Maria, a biotech expert, said that among her friends, "I don't think anybody supports the Ukraine invasion. Everyone was shocked when this happened. No one believes something like this could have happened anymore." Despite Russian government efforts to block non-Russian sources of information, she said anybody who wants to access global news sources can still easily do so with a VPN, or a virtual private network on their phones. And everyone I know in Russia has one. I'm still in contact with all of my friends in Russia, my godchildren. There doesn't, even on Facebook, they can't post to Facebook, but they can send instant messages all the time. And that's how I communicate with them daily. A self-described middle-class woman from Moscow said everyone she knew was totally shocked at the news that Russia was invading Ukraine. No one asked us our opinion. If they had, no one would have agreed. Karina, a 50-year-old art director, says, I was born in the Soviet Union, and it's all coming back now. The army is all over Moscow. If you say something out of line, they will stop you and arrest you. There is fear everywhere. The problem is that there are many Russians who cannot admit mistakes, cannot realize that we are trapped in a nightmare. Russians are very sensitive to criticism. We can criticize ourselves, but if it's coming from the outside, we take it very personally. People don't want to admit mistakes. It's much easier to watch TV and absorb the government propaganda. We did it for the 70 years of the Soviet Union, and it's the same psychology again. But what about the ordinary Russians who are not cosmopolitan and educated? They too know, or at least they know as much as they want to know. They may not grasp the full extent of Putin's folly and the world's reaction to it, but they know that their country has become a pariah in the community of nations. They know they are going to suffer in blood and death for this naked aggression that the Russian media is forbidden to call war. That's why the Нет война that you see stamped in various places throughout Russia, it means no to war. Using the word война, war, is forbidden. They know that Russian celebrities, opera singers, and Bolshoi dancers have shouted no to war. They know that Echo Moscow and TV Rain have disappeared from the air. They know that a producer at Channel 1, the state news channel, risked her freedom to declare on the air that this broadcast is lying to you. Don't believe their propaganda. They know that when they hear pleas for help from their brothers and sisters and cousins and grandparents in Ukraine, and they fear for their safety. They know when their conscripted sons text them from the front that Ukrainians are killing Russians when they were told that they would welcome them with open arms. And they know to fear the worst when those texts stop coming. They don't have to be told. They know. They know that the ruble has lost half its value, has bounced back a little, and grocery store shelves are getting bare. They know, and they are worried. They know they can find the truth if they want it. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, your tax dollars at work, is showing the carnage in Ukraine on multiple social media platforms, and it is still possible to message friends in the West, as I just mentioned. Russia's only English language newspaper, the Moscow Times, publishes the truth, uses the word war, and it's available all over the country if they want to know. They know even if they'll never admit that they know. They will even berate those who have the courage to say it out loud, the ones who face down thugs and carve Нет война in the ice of the canals of St. Petersburg. They will even fill a stadium to cheer Putin's claims in an image ever so reminiscent of Nazi Germany's obeisance to Hitler. But they know. Those who grew up in the Soviet period learned at their mother's knee how to know something they could never acknowledge to another soul. They knew when a neighbor disappeared in the night. They knew when a colleague slipped samizdat, an unauthorized manuscript or censored document, into his bag. They knew when their son's lips grew too loose over vodka at midnight. They knew, but they could never show in any way that they knew. They couldn't acknowledge, even to their own family, That they knew. One of the most celebrated heroes of the Soviet Union was a 13-year-old boy named Pavel, who told his teacher what he'd heard his father whisper at the kitchen table long after his parents thought he was asleep. His father was executed, but Pavel was celebrated as a hero for telling their secret, an orphan hero. That was in the darkest days of the Cold War, but since the invasion, we are seeing a modern reprise. The New York Times reported in May about a teacher on the Russian island of Sakhalin in the Pacific, time out, all the way over there in the Pacific, the island in the Pacific, where I went on a helicopter in 1995 to work with the one newspaper on Sakhalin Island. This teacher showed a YouTube video to her 8th grade class in which children in both Russian and Ukrainian sing about a world without war. That word. After she played it, a group of girls quizzed her on her views. Ukraine is a separate country, a separate one, she told them. No longer, one of the girls shot back. Arrested and dragged into court, the teacher was fined $400 for publicly discrediting Russia's armed forces and then fired for her job for amoral behavior. It's as though they've all plunged into some kind of madness, she told the Times in a telephone interview. Just yesterday, I got an email from a friend who lives in Kaliningrad, the thumb of Russia that's unconnected to the rest of the country, right there. At the end of World War II, Stalin wanted a warm weather port, so he took it. Kaliningrad looks like Germany, or perhaps Poland. It was a part of both at different times. Nothing seems Russian about it, but indeed it is. This friend sent in a photo he'd taken of a music sheet that was just distributed to children in his daughter's 2nd grade class. Sung to the tune of a popular folk song, it was a paean to the patriotic Russians from Magadan, which is significant. Magadan on the Pacific is where the gulags were, to Odessa on the Black Sea, who are rising up in support of the fathers and sons fighting to free Ukrainians from the Nazis. The propaganda stream is bubbling over, and in a crooked sense of reality, the mothers and fathers who were rehearsing that song with their children know very well that the Russian lightning strike in Ukraine must be going to hell in a handbasket if songs like this one are coming home with their children. During the Soviet period, they had to unknow what they knew, and they got very good at it. Today, they're unknowing this war. They have to. To acknowledge it would drive them mad. Many friends want to know what's happened to the free press in Russia that I was working so hard to establish as the USIA journalist in residence in 1995 across all 11 time zones of the country that occupies 1/7 of our planet. For an up-to-date answer to that, I emailed one of the journalists I worked with last week. Here's his response. If you consume only Russian government media, and that's probably true for about 70% of Russians, you wouldn't even know there's a war going on. It's quite absurd watching this coverage. It's like a parallel reality where you see a news piece about the Russian army liberating one Ukrainian town after another. They're just making it up as they go along. Not a single news story would mention that there's a war, there's resistance in Ukraine. Not long ago, I talked to a few editors at all these propaganda news networks leading up to the invasion. Right now, all of them are so demoralized. They're telling me they are absolutely devastated. Their souls are crushed. And so many of them are simply leaving, as my friend has done. He's now working as a journalist for the Medusa news website in Latvia. I can't go back to Russia until Putin is either not alive or not the head of the Kremlin. I love my country. I want to live there. I want to be with my family. I love my parents. The day after I left, he's still talking, on March 4th, the Russian parliament, in a kind of extraordinary session of both chambers, which rarely happens, passed a bill effectively criminalizing my work. It's a law that punishes journalists for disseminating false information about the Russian military. The same day we arrived in Latvia, we found out that our website was blocked for disseminating false information about the Russian special operation in Ukraine. It was obvious we were banned for calling the war a war. That's not a word you'll ever hear on Russian government airwaves anywhere. Those thousands of Russians, this is end quote, those thousands of Russians who marched in the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg chanting "Ne voya," testified that Putin may have overplayed his hand this time. Those of you who've read my book, From Under the Russian Snow, which I discussed in this space 4 years ago, know that Anna Gradskaya is something of a hero to me. She directs the Regional Press Institute in St. Petersburg, where her efforts to instill the ethics of a free press to young journalists, despite the current conditions, have drawn the attention of the authorities. She's been dragged into court time after time and officially declared a foreign agent, which means state auditors can come into her office anytime and go through her laptop, trash her files without notice. On the day of the invasion, she spit in Putin's eye with a screed against the war posted on Facebook. And now, at age 80, she calls herself the oldest activist against the war in Russia. She's in the eye of the hurricane once again. This morning, she texted me that she's just been informed that the, quote, the Russian authorities claim I do not have the legal right to leave the country, despite the fact that she has a multi-entry American visa. It appears I'm trapped. Because I have so many friends in Russia, including 3 godchildren, I worry about how the rest of the world has begun to paint all Russians with the same broad brush. Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times expressed my views in an opinion piece after the Russian athletes were banned from Wimbledon and the Boston Marathon. Quote, I understand the need to express revulsion at what Russia is doing, but I argue we should be wary of treating every Russian citizen as the enemy, especially when so many Russians have been heroically risking arrest to protest the war. I also worry that at a practical level, we should be peeling ordinary Russians away from Putin, and measures such as this simply lump all Russians together with Putin in a way that helps him. And what of the Russians who lack the courage to speak out? They are huddled at home, convinced that they will pay a substantial price in blood and treasure for this war for Putin's folly. Thank you. How much time do we have for questions?
You can talk as long as you want and answer as many questions, but typically we do about an hour, so maybe 20 minutes.
Okay.
Does that sound okay? Yeah.
Any
And if
questions?
people need to leave, of course you can. And I'm going to get the Zoomers on.
Yes.
Question, Michelle. You mentioned that, about the athletes being excluded from different events and things like that. This is just my opinion. Wouldn't the reason behind that be to try to turn more people against Putin, what Putin's doing? I mean, I
And
understand that we're
it
looking
does,
at-
and in fact, that's exactly the effect that it has among those who are opposed to what's going on. But our concern, Christoph's concern, which I share, is that it's having an effect of pushing people who in fact are very much opposed to what's going on, Russians who are very much opposed to what's going on, into his camp by, the simple effort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And that is an effective recognition. I heard Djokovic, who said at the French Open, who said that he hated what was going on in Ukraine, but he loved these people, and maybe he had to love Putin too. So I think that we can actually observe that this kind of, I don't think it has the effect that people were hoping that it would have. However, they moved the it's not World Cup, but the big European soccer match finals from St. Petersburg. That I think was right on, but and mass actions make perfect sense. But it seems like the individual athletes who in the French Open or Wimbledon are indeed allowed to be singled away from their country, to me, at any rate. Yes?
So the internet in the last few days has been reporting Putin as a terminal illness. Do you think that's true?
No. I wish it were, but that actually has been floated pretty regularly. In fact, Radio Free Europe, which, by the way, if you are interested at all in what's actually happening in Ukraine, go to Facebook and like Radio Free Europe, and their posts will come into your feed, and they are fantastic. If there's anything good that we do in the world, this is it. This is it. And in fact, it's the Marshall Plan. It's what's left of the Marshall Plan. And if you'll recall, the previous administration tried to eliminate it, I think at a request from Putin. So I think that I send them money. They get tax dollars from me. I'm writing checks, because this is indeed the a way to know what actually is happening on the ground, and it's very good reporting. It's every besides eyes and boots on the ground, their resources are all clearly available to anybody who wants to find out where ideas come from and so forth. So, and I happen to have 8 good friends who are all working for them now, and I know the ethics of these people and the kind of work that they do. So, but that story has been refuted by Radio Free Europe and others. It appears that he's isolated, totally isolated from any other leadership. He listens apparently to only one person in his inner circle, and therefore doesn't have to brook any dissent. That's what an autocrat does. Doesn't have to listen to any dissent anywhere, and that's truly what he's become.
Can I pause for just a sec? We have another question here, but I want to just also find out, are there any questions from Zoom land? You guys can use the raise your hand, or you can just show me your hand. Okay, so Mike, after Marianne asks her question here, we'll go Mike and then Mary. Okay?
Okay, Marianne?
Would you hazard a guess as to what his long plan is? I mean, do you think he will pull out on his own?
I really believed that Victory Day was something big was going to happen on Victory Day, May 9th. And the fact that really nothing happened, neither a declaration of victory, it would have been an out. It would even have been an out that most Russians would have accepted. Even if they knew in the back of their brain this was a crock, they would have accepted that. To have said, we won, and leave. All right, at least they're gone. They're out. But that didn't happen, nor did this mass mobilization that the other side, that didn't happen either. However, they're still carrying on with many of the big lies, one of which is that there's no conscription, when in fact, people are posting on their social media that their sons were showed up to teach at a school in Novgorod and were promptly put on a truck, and now they're getting texts from them from Ukraine, and they don't know what's happening really, except that it's not good. And then when the texts stop coming, Russia does not repatriate the remains of its soldiers. It does repatriate officers. So parents may never know. In the book, I write about the mothers of Russia who spent days and weeks and years trying to find out what happened to their sons who were sent to Chechnya in the 2 Chechen wars. They too were not repatriated. It's something that's very hard for most Western societies to understand, that even as brutal as the chaplain showing up at your doorstep is, at least you have some knowledge of what happened. And when there's no repatriation, you don't know. You just don't know.
All right.
And as for the future, I wish. Right now, it looks like we're talking about a very long and brutal struggle. And Ukraine, the Kiev Independent, the main newspaper in Kiev, just replied to President Biden's editorial in the New York Times yesterday. The editorial was in yesterday, and they replied this morning. And this morning they said that they implied from Biden's speech that he would condone their giving up territory. And right now, the Ukrainians are not inclined to give up the Donbass or their access to the Black Sea. So I think we're in for this for the long haul. And I'm a Pollyanna. I mean, I want to believe that there's a way to bring this together, but I don't see it. Okay?
All right. So Mike, if you want, it was Mike, right, who had the question first? You want to go ahead and unmute, and then we can hear your question. Let's see.
My question was, do you have any idea what Putin's long plan would be? You kind of just answered it. Is something he could decide to just say, okay, as you said, we won and pull out. What do you think he wants?
I know what he wants. He wants to restore the glory of the Soviet Union. He believes that the loss of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the last century. That's what he wants. He wants to restore that buffer to the West. And Ukraine's the biggest country sitting on the other side of the border. They got a piece of it easily. The West barely snickered when they took Crimea. But now, that's what he wants. But I think, and what do I know? But I think that there's realization at this point that that isn't going to happen, that a total victory that would bring Ukraine into Russia is not likely to happen. The West and NATO, I don't think, would allow that to happen. But Biden laid out very carefully, this is what we'll do and this is what we won't, which you either think is brilliant or folly. But it's pretty clear that right now long-range missiles are not going to be delivered to Ukraine, which wants them very desperately, because they could land in Russia and cause the same kind of destruction that's happening in Ukraine right now.
And then we've got Mary next.
I'm wondering how much of the food relief or medical relief or any of that is able to get through to the Ukrainians, or are they all stopped at borders and they're not getting anything, the people that are trapped there?
It depends on what city you're talking about. At Mariupol, nothing was getting through until they finally allowed those buses, those 38 buses to fill. But you know where they went? They went to Russia. Those people are now living, who left the steel plant, they're living in camps in Western Russia. They've been stripped of all of their personal identities. They've been issued Russian passports. Their Ukrainian papers are gone. It's not a good thing by anybody's measure. As far as humanitarian relief into the country, it's been immense, and it is getting through. But remember, we're talking right now. The only battles, hot battles that are going on the eastern edge of Ukraine and southeast, the Donbass, which, by the way, has been fighting since I think 2010. Separatists who want to be part of Russia, and in fact, at one point were actually part of Russia. They've been fighting a separatist battle there, and now Russia is they're delighted because Russia has taken up their cause. But the rest of the country, 80% of the country right now is right here. This is the Donbass, and here's Crimea, and Mariupol is right there, and Severnovodsk is right here. So if you carve that out, that's the land that where hot war is going on. They're still shooting missiles into other parts of Russia, but I don't know, 70% of the country is now begun to rebuild. The destruction around Kyiv is being repaired. There's those. In fact, Radio Free Europe had a big story probably 3 weeks ago that, in fact, all of the middle of Ukraine, they're planting wheat and planting all of their harvest. That's the breadbasket of Europe, by the way. They're planting. They're out in their fields. It's pretty much normal for that period. People are returning to the country. Of those huge number of people that fled to Poland and Moldova, many of them are returning, especially those in the central or western part of the country. And resources, humanitarian resources, with the exception of the intense period, the area of intense fighting, those are getting through. Continue Don't stop. If you're sending humanitarian aid to different organizations, sending them through your church or whatever, continue, because there's a huge refugee problem that has to be dealt with, but a lot of that refugee issue is moving from Poland and Moldova into Ukraine itself, because people are coming back, even if they can't come back to where they left. So the shifting of the hot war to the east of Ukraine, it has been significant. But there's still a country at war. You cannot be younger than 60 and male and not be in the army. I mean, 60, I think pretty creaky by then. Well, not creaky enough. And there's a whole lot of Americans there, American veterans, for a variety of probably psychological reasons, which I won't go into at this moment. There's a whole lot of Americans there fighting with the Ukrainians and many other countries. So, Victoria?
You have talked repeatedly about the Russians really knowing what's going on, as well as those who have left the country and are wanting so much to go back to their country. Do you have any insight in knowing if there are any movements being developed or occurred for those who have left Russia and those within Russia that may likely overthrow Putin?
I wish. The problem is that any leadership for that is going to be in prison immediately. Navalny, they tried to kill him, couldn't. The guy's Superman. They could not kill him. So they just decided to put him into the worst prison in Russia. He's actually in the gulags now. He's in a prison camp very close to Magadan.
I'll put that, okay.
And so any leadership for that is within Russia is very unlikely to be able to grow. Outside of the country, Russians who've left, I know of 2 or 3 organizations that are trying to kind of organize resistance from outside the country, and they are using social media to do that largely. And I think there is a basis, a foundation for that to happen. But as far as getting to close enough to Putin to kill him, to get him out of the country, to whatever, I don't see that happening. You've all seen the picture of Putin at the end of this huge table, and his advisors are down at the other end. Well, first of all, he's a germaphobe. So that's part of what's happening. But it also is a perfect example of his isolation. He doesn't talk to people, and he is literally lives in a bunker, a very well protected, rather glorious bunker, which reminds us of some other autocrats in years past. But even as a Pollyanna, I'm not holding out hope for Russians to rise up. They only did it once, and it lasted for 70 years.
If something did happen to Russia, to Putin, what would happen?
Well, that's another very good question. There is no second in command. There's a guy, Medvedev, who is supposed to be kind of his vice premier or whatever, but he's just a figurehead. My fear would be that the military would take over. And the military, we know what happens when the military takes over any country, let alone one the size of Russia. And I don't know that we would get any resolution. There's no savior out there that I know of. Yes.
Isn't he so to himself, who's controlling the military?
Well, he is giving instruction, but you know he has first of all in the first few weeks of the war, 7 top generals were killed on battle. My husband, who's been in the military, tells me that you don't have top generals in battle. You know, they're supposed to be planning and sending information down. I know nothing about this, but he was shocked at that information. And then the general in charge, Putin's replaced the general in charge 3 times. So if I get the sense that if he doesn't hear what he wants to hear, you're out of here, I'll bring in the next guy. So it appears they found somebody at the moment who can actually run a war, but still, if he's being second guessed on a regular basis, that may not last long either. What it has shown is the Russian military is horribly run. They outran their supply lines in the effort to take Kiev immediately. And then if you saw anything about that river crossing on the inflatable over the Dnieper River, they tried to put inflatable bridge across. 400 Russians were killed in 4 hours at that place because it was easy to de-inflate the inflatable bridges. And they went into the river. And they were all wearing such heavy body armor that they drowned. There's a lot of stuff that you read about. You say, how could anybody be so stupid? But then, how could anybody be so vicious as to take what's not yours and kill and kill and kill to accomplish that?
Should we leave it there?
Okay, I think if anybody would like copies of my book, I'd love to sell you one, but I'll be over here, I'll sign it, and Mary Ann can tell you what it's about.
I want to thank you. This was so interesting and insightful.
Thank you for your service all these years. Journalists are a front line. Thank you.
And I want to acknowledge from a village standpoint, we have all 3 villages represented here and online. We have coasters, people from the coast side that came over to hear you. And that's kind of special because it's a big trek. And so many people Zooming from home. So thank you so much for educating us and entertaining us as well in your wonderful presentation.
Well, thank you all for listening.
Okay. Thanks, you guys. Thank you. Bye.
I don't think so.